Thank you for everybody for coming to the Power of Hyperlocal. I am Dean Stallone, the founder and CEO of PMD Media. I just also want to thank Kim Frank and Geopath for co-sponsoring the event. And also Scott Fiaschetti is going to go through some of the ground rules for the Q&A portion from the audience. Scott, do you want to take it away?
Yep, thanks, Dean. Just a few quick, simple ground rules, nothing too major. So we already have some questions we want to talk about, but we want to answer all of your questions as well. So please feel free to reach out in the Q&A widget in the Zoom platform, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can before the end of the session. So I think that's about it. So I'll hand it back to you, Dean.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. So again, thank you to everybody for coming. Just a little bit about the genesis for this event starting in the first place. I've been talking a lot with a lot of people in the industry over the course of the last couple months, and talking with Kim in particular, and Rick Robinson and Cedric Bernard, who are joining us on the panel today. Over the last few weeks, we've been thinking about the OH, out-of-home industry recovery and what it means for the industry in general and the advertising industry itself, and really what it means to get back to the basics. Things like amazing creative, solid calls to action, measurable KPIs, really things that are going to bring us back to profitability in 2020, 2021, and moving further. Also the biggest thing for us is the focus on hyperlocal and hyperlocal activation. Again, going back to basics. And to put this in perspective from my point of view and from PMD Media's point of view, I founded the company almost 30 years ago in an NYU dorm room in Manhattan. And the instinct that I had back then was that neighborhoods were all, right? So the out-of-home industry, before I even knew that we were considered out-of-home, we knew to go after people where they lived and worked, in those intimate areas of their neighborhoods, the places we call home. So neighborhoods for us has always been the original hyperlocal, where advertising reaches that last mile before home or office. So we find ourselves today in an unprecedented situation where there's going to be less out-of-town travel. Less people coming in from outside of town means more local outreach, plain and simple. So I'm going to hand it off to Kim to also kick it off a little bit too.
Yeah, super excited to be here. Thanks so much, Dean, for having me. I'm Kim Frank. I'm the president of Geopath, and I'm really excited to be in such amazing company on this panel today, joined by some really great peers from the out-of-home industry. Dean, I don't know if you want to give everybody an intro real quick, and then we'll just kind of get things started.
Sure, I'd love that. Obviously, Kim Frank from Geopath needs no introduction, and I'm so happy to have her here, and I think that speaks volumes, and as well as the media network side of the business is represented by Cedric Bernard. He's the CEO of Adkom. Cedric, thank you for being here as well. And the agency side of the business is represented by Rick Robinson, another superstar in the out-of-home industry, Chief Strategy Officer for Billups. Thank you for being with us, Rick. And the brand side of the business, or the brand side of any business really in advertising, is represented by another superstar, Brittany Harshbarger, who is the Senior Media Manager at Vita, Coco, and was one of the keynote speakers at the Go 2020 conference that happened, I guess, online virtually after it didn't happen live. So, but Brittany, thank you so much for being here. And I think it's a great panel. We're really excited to have a pep rally and a fun discussion. I think the first question, Kim, should go to you, which is the most pressing right now for everybody that's watching and everybody that's tuning in. Can you give us a snapshot of what the out-of-home industry is going through right now? What's the real world, the real eyes on the street showing us, and what are you seeing in the industry?
Yeah, sure, Dean, thanks. It's been such a crazy whirlwind time for everybody in the industry and beyond, of course, just trying to deal with life. And what we're seeing and what we've been seeing for quite some time is that what's going on in people's day-to-day life really does depend upon where they live, right? So those of us who are in the New York City area were severely impacted by what has been going on with the COVID-19 crisis. And when the industry all banded together to get some more real-time metrics available to us, we really started to see these patterns where it just opened our eyes that there's these pockets across the country where things have not really changed drastically. So at Geopath, that's been one of the things we've really been working on with all of our committees and board. It's understanding what's happening, and it's really changing day to day. So now we are towards the end of May 20th, and it kind of feels like we've been time traveling a little bit, but we're starting to see traffic in a lot of areas return to normal. We have information on the percentage of people who are leaving their homes every day, and that's getting up over 7 out of 10 people leaving their homes in the average day. So I am optimistic that metrics are starting to look up from a data side, but I would love to ask our panel, maybe starting with Rick, what are you seeing on the business side of out of home happening within your organization and beyond?
Sure, thanks, Kim. I think what we're seeing is the beginning. And right now, the big opportunity for out of home, in a word, is accountability. And Geopath has provided terrific guidance with the general numbers showing the trending, and that's been very helpful. And others have augmented data out there as well. And right now, what's happening is that we're able to take our tribal knowledge, our expertise. I mean, we're the experts, and that's what they're looking for us to do, is provide certainty in a time that is very uncertain. And the more we can add data science to our tribal knowledge, the better chance we have to create that comfort level. And it's beginning. This afternoon, I actually have a new business call with one of our teams in San Francisco to do a Zoom capabilities presentation, which, I'm going to have to kick off the rust, but it's exciting. So it's the beginning of the beginning. That's what we're seeing.
Cedric, how about you?
I think so. I've spent many, many years on the agency side, and in one agency where national out of home was, let's call it New York and LA. And I think it's an opportunity now to see that, to be New York and LA and everything in between. It is reaching out to people wherever they are, and they're not just in New York, not in LA, and they're everywhere in between. So it's exciting. It's an opportunity for all of us. It's also a very good creative opportunity to probably adapt the brand messaging to everywhere we are.
Great. And I think, Brittany, one of the reasons that I just loved having you on this panel is that your brand has been such a huge supporter of our channel. And that's kind of a, not to use the cliche word these days, but kind of a pivot for the Vita Coco brands. And now you guys have really embraced the industry. So I'd love to hear some of your perspective on what's going on, not just in terms of out of home, but in terms of like media spending in general.
Yeah, so thanks, Kim. We had a really interesting roller coaster ride up until this point, where if you all remember the first week of this, there was a lot of panic shopping going on. So we were actually worried. There was sort of some panic over on the Vita Coco side, like from the CMO and our team, wondering if we were going to have enough product to last us through the second half of the year, because you can't magically grow coconuts, quickly. It takes a long time. So we were selling at a pace that last week in March, or like second to last week in March, that was like 1 week equals 2 months of sales. It was crazy. People were flocking to the grocery stores. So what we did from a media side, basically my entire media plans all went to SHIT, like out the window. We moved our out of home buy in New York and LA to September, because we just felt in our gut that it would be a good time. We couldn't get out of it at that point, which I didn't want to, honestly. I knew that things would rebound, and I was so excited coming out of our last summer campaign, Impossible to Hate, that I have like the out of home bug now. And I was like, I don't want all these plans to just like get canceled. So I'm happy that we were able to shift. And right now we're doing something pretty interesting, launching June 1st in New York, thanking bodegas. The campaign sort of, we're not spending a ton, but it's like a love letter to bodegas, because like Dean mentioned earlier, like we as a business are going back to our basics in a way too, where we're like, okay, how did Vita Coco start? And for anyone who watched my keynote, you know that we started in we started in bodegas in Brooklyn, and they were the first ones to like take a chance on Vita Coco, even though it was in a weird packaging and they never heard of it. So we're gonna do phone kiosks and wild postings all over New York City. A lot of it redeeming credit from the September buy. And you know we love a phone kiosk. Vita Coco loves a phone kiosk. We're gonna the creative looks like a poster that you'd see in a window of a bodega. Like very, like the art look and feel is exactly like that. Like all these colors that don't really go together, weird fonts, and it's like a poem love letter to bodegas. Like walk in at 3 a.m., like they have like 40s coconut water or like probiotic soda and Advil all within 6 feet of each other. Just very like reminiscent of a bodega. So yeah, that's exciting that we were able to pivot like that.
Great. So we were all kind of in our pregame chat last week about our hyperlocal panel. And, you know, at some point in time, someone actually said like, so what is hyperlocal? So in case anybody out there is wondering, what is hyperlocal? What is hyperlocal, guys?
You know, I think it's different everywhere. You know, in the beginning, it started out with just wanting to find out where are the people, like where did everybody go and how are they moving around markets? And the hyperlocal became the call word for getting into neighborhoods. And now what we're finding, as you mentioned, is that the story is different everywhere. Each market has its own version of that. It's very bespoke. And so really what it boils down to is what it always is boiled down to, which is finding our people. Where do they live? Where do they go? How are they moving around? And getting our messages in front of them. But I wanted to digress for a second. Brittany, I had a question. The notion of thanking bodegas out on the public streets. And first of all, thank you to Vita Coco for your commitment to out of home. We just applaud you for that. So want to give you big props.
Here.
But secondly, you know, out of home always has this chance to be part of the dialogue on the street, to have this conversation with people. It's concurrent, it's specific, it's intimate, it's all these things all at once. Putting up a message that's a poem and a love letter is magic in that kind of situation. And what are the KPIs for the brand? Because I think we're going to see more brands trying to do this. Like, what's the expected outcome?
Well, the first iteration of this idea was thinking essential workers. And then by the time we got to something, we wanted to feel more, we didn't feel like we had the sort of brand to be saying that. Like, we're like, what's our version of an essential worker? And we were like, well, bodega people have to go in. These guys are like still working their hours. A lot of them don't know how to file the IRS sort of tax perks. So they're suffering, like these bodegas on every street corner in New York City. The KPI, that's an interesting question, Rick. Vita Coco's never been one to be really like meticulous about our KPIs and stuff. We've been trying to get more sort of into that lane, but I think press and like social shares, like from the Impossible to Hate campaign, we saw an interesting culmination of like out of home and social intersecting, especially with like New York City subways. I think if you do something a little bit out of the ordinary, you can really get people, especially in markets like New York and LA, even like Denver, to share stuff on social. We really, as a brand, look at that as a barometer for like cross-channel, sort of like how relevant in culture your campaign is. In our view, like the media choices are important, yes. Every media planner would tell you that. Like, I'm a media planner at my core, but the creative for out of home is, I think, 80% of sort of like the success of the campaign. Because if it's not a good creative, no one's even gonna give it, like, it can be the best media placement in the world, but you really have to do something to get noticed, you know?
I think it sounds like
that content and context. Yeah, it's exciting.
I think that, sorry, Rick, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think that's,
go.
you know, the creative is incredibly important. And I think also, Brittany, the fact that you and at Vita Coco are supporting the local businesses in New York and elsewhere, you know, the small businesses that are being impacted by this more than anything. I was talking to another fellow CEO this morning of a company that's much bigger than ours. I was talking to, believe it or not, the CEO of WeWork this morning, and not to name drop, but you know, he runs $1 billion company, and I was trying to tell him that the small businesses in this country are really suffering, you know, and bodegas are near and dear to our heart as well. And so local is not just, you know, pushing our message, but also pushing what's important to us. And I know the first thing that out of home industry did was thank the first responders and thank for the people that were getting us our groceries and taking us in hospitals. And now I'm seeing it much more attuned to like small business owners and those that are really suffering with not being able to get the PPP loan, or getting much less than they thought, and it's going to be less forgiven than we originally thought. So, you know, I think I second Rick's idea to applaud you guys for even thinking of the small businesses in New York and Brooklyn per se. Cedric, how are you guys working on the you know, the hyperlocal, and what do you guys think what is hyperlocal to you and at Adkom?
Well, for us, it's really trying to be present everywhere, and everywhere with hopefully a specific message for every neighborhood. I mean, I think right now there's a lot of people out there. I mean, we've seen the data. Rick talked about it. Kim talked about it. People are going back out. Maybe the way they commute is different. Maybe they're not going to work. Maybe they're going, well, just walking around in the neighborhood. Maybe they're just going shopping, essential shopping, but they're out there, they have access to that. And I think the opportunity is really to start showing our foreign national brands to start adapting their message to the local neighborhoods. So it's not talking about a big brand as that mass big brand, but how the big brand is also bringing value locally to the consumers, but also to the neighborhoods. So that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to build with Adkom. And well, as you know, it's a little challenging right now because, well, we're trying to get there and not everybody's out there yet, but we really believe in that. I mean, I think we believe that hyperlocal existed before COVID. I mean, I don't think COVID invented hyperlocal. I think hyperlocal is real now and is probably more legitimate in everybody's mind when you talk about big national brands. It's our job, all of us here and everybody else out there, to make it happen after. And it shouldn't be a 2020 thing. It should be a 2020 and beyond thing.
Scott, did you want to field some questions from the audience? Do we have any that came in? Anything interesting?
Yeah, a question came in, and it's to Brittany. And first of all, the person says they're a huge fan, so great there.
Of me or of Vita Coco?
I think both.
I was going to ask.
Something
On my
about,
phone tour this
something
month.
about wanting your autograph. I don't know. I think it's said in there. So.
Probably one of my reps on an IO.
But the question is, you know, as a brand, how are you receiving the data that's out there that's allowing you to kind of roll with realities of what's going on today? And how is that helping you make your decisions?
Well, luckily I'm dating somebody who works in an out-of-home agency, so that's one way. And then also, honestly, like asking my reps, like shout out to Greg Walensky from Intersection. He said he'd pay me if I said his name. So
Nice.
I said this in my keynote, and I'll say it again. Like I think I rely on the reps a lot more than a typical buyer, just because Vita Coco is not really a data first company. I don't have the tools in house. I mean, Kim was nice enough to give me a free Geopath login, and I just need to familiarize.
Were you supposed to say that? Is that allowed? Is she allowed to say that?
I think it's cool if we help brands buy out of home.
Yeah, and you know, the keynote thing, it was like my token. But it's hard. I don't see how brands are doing it. I think Vita Coco is in a rare position, but it's not easy. You kind of have to, it's all relationship based, kind of ask nicely for it. And then at some point though, you're gonna run out of that and need like an agency. So when I go away, maybe Vita Coco will need that, but not right now.
Scott, you want to throw out another audience question before we go into one of the other Pat,
Actually, right now that's all we have. So please feel free. I'll keep monitoring the questions. So if you're out there, I see a lot of you out there. Definitely ask some questions, and we'll get that to the panel.
cool. So in other words, that's a call for everybody to ask questions. I'm gonna pull my channel my best Brian Lehrer and ask people to call in. I don't even know the number for WNYC, but I'm not gonna go into that. So I think the other question that I really was interested in, and I guess I can ask Rick this, because I think this is probably, an interesting idea for Rick to answer, but how do you think creative amplifies the hyperlocal targeting in general, and specifically, Rick, if you have any specifics that you can cite as well? And I'm not throwing you a hardball.
Oh, bring it. It's all good. Look, I think that out of home uniquely always talks about what's happening right now. So if you were on a desert island for the last 8 weeks and you landed in New York or LA or somewhere in the US, you would immediately notice all the COVID messaging all over town. And you would ask yourself, what the heck is going on? And that's going to apply as we emerge out of COVID and we emerge in our recovery. The tone and empathy and direction of the messaging will reflect the mindset of what's going on with people as they're out on the streets, which is really a very exciting time, because imagine as everybody is released from this detention, where the exuberance and optimism and concurrent feeling of what's next, and America, and we can rebuild this, and we're going to fight. That's a strong collective mindset that out of home can be the channel for, where the dialogue can happen. And so out of home is always part of that conversation on the streets. When it comes to individual brands and hyperlocal and creative, it's broader than just that. You always want the context and the content to come together. Out of home doesn't have editorial as air cover. The editorial for out of home is the neighborhood it's in, right? What you're seeing around it, the adjacency. It's next to a bodega. Therefore, the poem love letter works next to the bodega. So for us, and I think for all of us in this business, what we sweat over is this message in the right spot? And if it is, then we've elevated everything. We've elevated the experience. We've earned the right to be there. The public enjoys it, and it's harmonious. And all the basic rules apply. One idea, a few key elements, high contrast, don't get too fancy, chunk it up a bit. If you look at a piece of out-of-home creative and you go, yeah, that's great, then it is. If you're not sure, then it isn't, and start over. So there's some input.
No, that's great. I think that I would throw the same question to Cedric. Is there anything that you think that creative can do to amplify hyperlocal, Cedric?
So that's my perception is it needs to give the feeling that you're talking to the people where they are. I mean, I think the out of home is known and well known for brand awareness, and it's true. I mean, it's successful, and in a way, the more you can put out of home everywhere, it helps that. I think what helps as well is to give a very, very targeted message. If you're talking to someone in Brooklyn, talk to somebody in Brooklyn. If you're talking to somebody in the Midwest, talk to them in the Midwest and how they react to that. So I think it's really adapting the message to everywhere, and it's easy to do. I mean, I think there's also that thought that it's easier to do just the same campaign everywhere. No, just build your plan and adapt your message wherever you go.
Yeah, I have a pretty decent example of that. When we worked on PMD, worked on a campaign last year for AT&T Mobility, Codes of Culture, and they had creative that was very specific to each location. They had, it's a 212 thing in Manhattan. They had a 718 thing in Brooklyn. They had a 312 thing in Chicago. They had stuff in LA and also in Atlanta. And they, really called out the creative was local people, local artists, and multicultural figures in those markets in the creative, as well as having the area codes and like really pushing out what's great about the location and the city. But all the creative was obviously put together with the same branding, the same general feel, but it was very specific to the locale where they were being shown. So And that was launched all over the country with multiple types of out-of-home partners. And
Yeah, I remember that
networks.
campaign. It was running in LA, the 213, the 310, and 818. And I can
Yeah.
recall checking it. Like, all right, wait a minute. Is that in the right neighborhood? Because 213 is east side, and we're not that interested in 310, which is west side. And so
Right.
it was like, don't get your area code in my neighborhood. So there's a little bit of that, territoriality that happens, right, with hyperlocal and with out of home in general, because that campaign happened pre-COVID. And so I think that's always there. It's just more enhanced now than ever before.
So Brittany mentioned loving phone kiosks, and now I'm listening to all of you guys, and it has me thinking, like, so we talked about targeting and data and audience and creative. Is there also like a format component to the local? Where in one market you're using a multitude of different formats or one format? How are the format choices being made when it comes to, local, hyper-local targeting?
I think there's sort of a trend that COVID's going to expedite, and there's this gap. So like, I feel like the best way to do hyper local creative and media buying is programmatic digital, right? Like that's the easiest way to change your message. And I don't know much about that. It's very new to out of home, but coming from digital media, I know the same concept. But I think big brands that have been doing out of home for decades and spend a lot of time planning, like AT&T's and Vita Coco's, like it's very hard to pull off a static out of home campaign with messaging per market. It's expensive to get the creative for that. It's risky. To Rick's point, you might put it in the wrong location because there's a lot of people in between like the creative person and the person posting it. If big brands who have like a lot of brand equity could get on board with digital formats, like we're personally not, like we hear digital out of home and we're like, that's scary to us. I think that you could, out of home could do a lot more in terms of like segmenting certain creative, like hyper local creative and targeting, because it's just a very manual process. But we love, I feel like brands like us, especially like beverage, love a static billboard, phone kiosk. Like Vita Coco's like, how many more years do we have of buying phone kiosks? Like scared that they're going to go away and it's just going to be Link, even though like I've gotten them on board to like Link on National Hangover Day. We did they're great for one day takeovers, but I think that's a disconnect. I think if the industry could think of brands like ours in terms of digital and maybe not sell it so much as like motion and more like, oh, this is essentially a static placement, because it is, you can make it back. I think the targeting and creative could be a lot cooler.
In our view, place becomes format. So it starts with that. Where do I need to be? And then that could be a wall, right? If it's in the right spot. Generally though, if you're in local tighter neighborhoods down at street level, it's more street level out of home. But really we try to be format agnostic and get to place. Unless there's something in the creative that's, makes the format part of the messaging, right? Where it's gotta be in a certain type of format, or, we're talking about shelter on a bus shelter or something to that effect. But place is the driver.
It looks like we had a lot of questions come in, Scott. I don't know if you want to take some from the audience.
Exactly. Yeah, I was just going to jump in. This one is to Cedric and Dean. Also mentioned, could answer this one. What data are you using to help brands figure out where people are spending time and help them convince them to spend hyper locally? So how?
Dean, you want to go or you want me to go?
You knock it out of the park, Cedric.
So we have a partner that provides data to us in terms of traffic data, audience data, and actually in the audience, Dan Levy would love to speak to that. I think what we're trying to do is really, out of home is, or used to be a location medium, and it's really hard to convince people to buy based on audience, and it's where we need to go. So I think we try to do kind of what Rick is describing, is to remember that location matters, and it's how do you overlay audience with location. And we want to use audience to say you have many opportunities in front of you in terms of different formats and different units. And audience can help you refine, make a better plan. So it's really combining that.
I realized I didn't answer Kim's question before, so I'm gonna give that another shot. I need to do a better job listening of the question. One interesting thing, how we plan out of home per market is we think of our target audience in that market. We pretty much know more or less who's a Vita Coco drinker from IRI data and our retailer data. And we think of their day in a life, just like, I know this is basic, but bear with me. We just think of their journey on a weekday and a weekend. Just like, all right, they commute this way. In New York City, it's easy. Everyone takes the subway. All right, how many people are you reaching in that subway? Is it worth the price? Yes, it actually is. Okay. If you're reaching everyone on their daily, and then on the weekends, like someone in Dallas or Chicago, maybe we launch free rides there because there's this disconnect of mass transit getting from point A to point B. Does this market need free rides? Does it not? We think of the person in that market, and we usually do this by asking our field team or sales team there. And we're like, just describe, like, even when we're planning radio, what radio stations do you listen to? It's very like survey based and people in that market. As I guess we lean more on like human like data than any other, of just describing like what people do in that market.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you mentioned human data. I mean, to answer the question from the audience member, and I hope it wasn't one of my staff members that threw that one out because it's a tough one. But yeah, a lot of the data that we have is based on 29 years of experience of markets, right? So we've been in New York for 29 years. We've been in LA for 25. We've been in, Chicago for over 20, Boston, same thing. Somebody was asking us about Miami the other day. It's 15 years, a lot of experience, deep level experience of the market, where the neighborhoods, again, going back to neighborhoods and where people are, where they live and work, who they are, what their demographic is, but also what their psychographic is, where they go. A lot of it has to do with the people that work for us and been working for us for years. And also the data that we put into play from clients and what they're giving us on their ground and on their particular insights. A lot of the clients that we have that come to us have tremendous insights, like healthcare companies have data they dice and splice because they have a tremendous amount invested a tremendous amount in that technology for their clients and their patients. So we do a little bit of both in terms of giving our input as well as the client's input of where we should be and who we should reach and how we should reach them. So
The art and science of it all, right?
The art and science, yeah, that's a good. It's true.
Just to jump in, there's a couple of questions that I'm going to try to paraphrase and combine that have been around this idea of, we've been talking about hyperlocal as very neighborhood focused. Like, are there any thoughts around, scale? How do you scale with hyperlocal? Is it, do you see regional as being hyperlocal, or can you do hyperlocal nationally at some level? And I think we may have hit on some of those points already, but I just want to put that out there.
I think that's a good question. And I think it's important to say that hyperlocal is not just one sign in one neighborhood, right? And if you look at how we buy out of home in general, it's usually some version of one location at a time, whether it's 500 or 10. We're always concerned about the where part of it first. And so same thing goes here. Hyperlocal, I think, really is referring to where we're finding more people right now. And that's allowing us to pivot how we choose our distribution of inventory when we put a plan together. So, if you bought 100 bulletins in LA pre-COVID, there was a certain playbook you had. And now post-COVID or during COVID, that playbook, in terms of what those dots on a map look like, is going to be a little bit different. It's going to reflect and pivot to where people are spending more of their time. So of course that's scalable. Local, regional, national, global, the universe, across the board.
And just to follow up to that question, as different markets open up and you talk about being where the people are, will that influence what markets you may recommend being in if you have that opportunity to influence market or recommend a market?
I think it's part of it, and I don't want to speak for the panel, but that's, you know, that's just part of fundamental out-of-home planning. You know, how is each market performing relative to what we're trying to do? But again, pre-COVID, if we had a campaign that was, you know, a certain demo and age and behavioral style, and we looked at a list of markets, and some of them performed better relative to where that audience spent their time and where the out-of-home inventory existed, we would adjust the market list. Same thing goes here. It's just the behavior patterns are different.
Yeah, and just like speaking for what changes based on behavior is like pre-COVID, we never really bought below 23rd Street. We call it Brookhaven. We love just below 23rd Street and then Brooklyn. But post-COVID, it almost seems like since travel, like I don't know about you guys, but those in New York, like people aren't leaving their hometowns as much. It's more saturated with local. So that might be an opportunity that there's a higher percentage of those impressions are actually local impressions and not visiting from out of town or tourists, especially in a place like Times Square or Fifth Avenue. Like maybe that is somewhere we should think about now if we want to hone in on local New Yorkers, because there's not as many tourists. Like it's not as, it's more saturated with locals, I guess.
Yeah, how is that going to change the buys? What I'm curious about is how is that, you know, affecting Rick's clients, and how is that affecting, you know, Kim's members in terms of how are the big guys? I think somebody just mentioned Dan Levy at Clear Channel who's listening and watching. But how is that affecting their inventory and what they're charging, what they're selling, what they're pushing their clients to do? Are they taking stuff off of Sunset Boulevard and bringing it into Ventura Boulevard, or are they, you know, are they taking things off of Times Square and putting it more into East Village and Brooklyn Heights and Williamsburg? Like, how is things being shifted, and are they going to be shifted, or are the big inventory and the big touristy areas going to be, you know, downgraded and less valued at this point, or is it just going to even out later on? Because as a smaller player that doesn't have inventory, you know, and a huge billboard in Times Square or Sunset Strip, I don't know how that's playing out from a network owner up.
Sure. I think it's really important for everyone to understand this is a very fluid situation, and there is no silver bullet, one answer. And I'm not laying up here and hedging. It's just the truth. And so, you know, sure, we're seeing pivots, you know, 405 freeway, Sunset Strip, maybe a little less important right at the moment. And you can dive into more neighborhoods. And I think that's happening with core inventory across almost all markets, and then the donut of more activity out in the neighborhoods. But that's not the case for everybody. Because for another brand, if the Sunset Strip is at 60% of normal and they can get a great value, maybe they want to be on it right now. Maybe now is the perfect time to invest in that space when they hadn't had access to before. So a pivot for one brand is a big opportunity for another. What's really important here is for all of us in this industry to realize that we are being put to the test. This is the biggest challenge of our career. We tout ourselves as the experts. We now need to really dive in and find creative ways to put that Rubik's Cube of out-of-home inventory together to line up with any campaign's goals, strategies, and tactics. And the good news is we have the tools to do it. We have the data like never before to allow us to be smart and mix that with the art of all the experience you mentioned earlier. So it's fluid. It's not one size fits all. Opportunity for some, changes for others, and challenging and exciting times.
I see that as, and I don't want to offend anybody, I don't believe in a pre-COVID and a post-COVID. I think those stories, we knew of them before. I mean, Rick, you're saying it, we have experience in out-of-home, we've said the story. I think the opportunity is to maybe have others and brands listen differently going forward. But I think COVID didn't make any of us smarter. I think it's really, we knew about what to do. We knew about how to recommend things. I mean, Rick, you're an expert in that. I think it's more, how do we get people, brands to better understand what we do? How do we prove ourselves through that by showing that hyperlocal works, and it doesn't mean that you need to drop your national campaign and the way you do national.
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
how do we combine everything? How do we continue telling the stories that we've been saying for a few years now? How do we just adapt it a little bit and to keep on going? Yeah, I mean, we're all suffering, and some of us more than others, but it's more about COVID is not changing the game. It's probably, let's use that as an opportunity to tell the story differently.
And enhancing the need for certainty, all right? Certainty and accountability. That's really our opportunity now. And if anything, this period we're in is just enhancing and exacerbating that question, making it more forward.
Yeah, don't you feel like this is kind of pushing us to evolve at a faster rate than we would have as a channel had things just taken the course that we were on?
Yeah,
I feel
absolutely.
like I've been devolving. I don't know about anybody else, but I feel like I'm back to,
Maybe
I
on a
don't know.
personal
I'm not
level,
going
since we're not
anywhere.
moving around as much as we would like. Look, this is a shock to the system, which is always opportunity. And I know that's a cliche, but for our industry, I think we were ready for it already. We were already doing a lot of the things pushing us in the right direction. And this shortens the roadmap. And we certainly have the people and the brains and the commitment and data and investment to do it.
Scott, you got any more for us?
One more question. Definitely a lot of kudos and great comments around the bodega strategy that Brittany was talking about. Are there any other brands that anybody's recognized through the crisis that they feel have been doing a good job with through the crisis and communicating hyperlocally? Is anybody else standing out that comes to mind?
I think we need Bill Board from Out of Home today on this panel to start answering those questions.
He's out there. I see him.
I can say that it's been very encouraging and powerful to see what the healthcare sector has done. In particular, a couple brands we work with, City of Hope and Blue Shield, and just strong messaging. First of all, they stayed committed to the space. They stayed committed to the space. They kept their inventory on the street. Were able to use the data to understand how to perhaps true up their investment. And then they spoke to the public in a very powerful way and realized that it was an opportunity to connect to their neighborhoods in ways that they really wouldn't ever be able to up till now. And I think that that's solidified the role and the essential nature of out of home in many communities. I've also seen the same thing come from community banks as well. That whole we're in it together, we're invested in this community, we're invested in this economy. And I think those brands will benefit long run. And it speaks to the essential nature of the medium, how out of home is the voice for many cities.
Yeah, I think out of home has been one of the slowest channels for brands to adapt to. You saw like a lot of outdated messaging. I feel like brands were super scared of what to do out of home because it seemed very real and raw to them probably. Like when you're out of the house, like how do you speak to people? I would agree that healthcare companies like pharmacies and delivery companies, not really so much the national ones, more like local ones have done a good job. And then I don't know the economics behind this, but the government like has done a really good job of PSAing out, stay inside. And maybe that's one of the reasons why brands have been a little scared to advertise outside, because it's a little contradictory to what the people in charge, the government, telling us. Like, stay inside, but we want to advertise to you right now. I mean, I think I think there might be an opportunity, at least like at my company, there was an article shared around this week or last week about Wall Street Journal about the TV networks letting big advertisers out of some spends because the inventory doesn't exist, but that's a challenge to that channel specifically, not so much to out of home. And those are going to be dollars freed up during, a time of year where people are going to be out and about. So I think I see that as an opportunity because these brands have to spend their media budgets and it's super difficult to figure out like the right way to spend it. And I feel like just like educating on why this is a good time to be advertising, it really is. Like brands who advertised during the Great Depression came up on top And there's a lot of stats like that personally has worked on me to incentivize me to spend during this time. Like there's a share of voice out there that's brands that really risk and say stuff in the right way, no matter what channel you're really speaking to consumers on, are probably going to benefit a lot more than they would have otherwise, because people are craving advertising that doesn't talk about COVID.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Are we tired of hearing like stay home, wash your hands? Is it time for us to be leaning in and looking at where regulations are being lifted and welcoming people back out to get their tattoos and go bowling or whatever it happens to be? Like, are we paying attention to where regulations are being lifted and looking at, okay, well, you can now get a haircut for God's sake, and Dean's wife doesn't have to cut his hair anymore? Like, are we paying attention as a channel? Not to throw you under the bus, Dean, it looks fabulous. You did a great job. But should we be paying attention, like, to the locations where people are? And it's, I mean, I was talking to somebody from Lamar and Sheboygan today. Like, should we be paying attention to what the regulations are across this country and then really hitting those places as people are going out and welcome them back out instead of saying like, thank you and wash your hands?
I think that's all coming. You know, the brands, as soon as, not quite yet, but as soon as we get into more reopening, slightly more comfort level, and the reopening phase is more of the norm, then the opportunity is going to be fantastic and out of home, and to have a very positive conversation about what's next. And I look forward to that. And again, it goes back to the role out of home has in the public space as part of the real estate and part of the neighborhood and part of the dialogue in the city.
Something that we heard a lot of, you know, when this first started was you don't want to be tone deaf. You know, you don't want to be selling your services or products and not acknowledging the fact that we're in a pretty bad situation, right? But now I think, and everybody that I talked to over the course of the last couple of months, it's been moving further and further away from, oh my God, to now like, enough, let's just move on. Let's try and muscle through. Let's try and get testing done. Let's try and be safe, but let's try and move on. And so I think that's showing a little bit too, like people are really wanting the messaging. The other thing is the out-of-home industry, out-of-home products, to my mind, can't be tone deaf. You really, because it's a static image or, okay, a digital image that comes on or is broadcast one time, and it's not going to say something or show something that's you know, very specific to one particular person. You're kind of broadcasting to a whole community. So to me, it's difficult for our industry to look bad in that case. So I think everything that we did and everything we keep doing about thanking people and making people aware of the situation, trying to be safe, I think is you know, as a home run in every respect, you know. So I don't think, I can't get tired of it. So.
It certainly had to be a creative challenge, I think, for those who are running television ads. I don't know about you, but I got like really twitchy every time I would see an ad where there was a bunch of people in a restaurant. But to like pull your television creative and then recreate it in an environment where people aren't allowed to go to studios and things just had to have been a massive creative challenge for television.
Yeah, I heard there were sort of 3 phases, or we're in the third of 3 phases for TV creative. Number 1 was stay safe, 2 was thank you, and then now it's sort of cringy. Like I was in a conference for creative discussions about COVID recently, and it's some of the worst creative that has been seen in a long time, because there's brands talking about stuff that they really shouldn't be. It's just a bandwagon theme, and it's a lot of the same, and it's a lot of stock imagery, voiceovers, and everyone's doing their best, but like they had to fill the space. And now I feel like the TV ad economics is really probably going to feel this the most, even though right off the bat you probably would have thought radio out of home. I think longer term TV, because of this creative challenge and how expensive it is. You know, it's like running an ad in the Super Bowl. Lots of very risky. I feel like out of home might have an opportunity. There's less risk. You don't have to go so into depth. You can kind of say something subtly, let it be out there. You don't have to have 30 seconds of likely just doing something that people are gonna not like, you know?
Scott, how we doing with additional questions?
You know, I think the last bit of conversation covered a lot of the questions. There's one question here that I think is interesting, and not to put everyone on the spot, but it's around what do you see as the role of hyperlocal for industries that are really dependent on live events, so like entertainment or music? Is there any thoughts around that?
I mean, that's what my company is based on. We originally started with live events. We have I think a good deal of clients, direct clients that we have invited to this event and are on the event right now that are suffering, tremendously from this. I know JJ Petavi is the CMO of Brooklyn Museum. They're near and dear to us, and they're shut down. They can't have people in their institution, and we don't know when they can go back. And as bad as it is for JJ and the Brooklyn Museum, it's worse for Broadway, which who's going to go into a theater right now and sit, shoulder to shoulder with somebody in the theater? So it's a really tough time for that industry, and I don't know when that's going to get any better. It's a scary proposition for them, but I think that we have to be able to support them as much as we can. And at my company, we've been trying to support our clients with just literally sending out emails over and over saying, we're here, we can help, let us help you, let's talk, we'll figure something out, we can strategize for 2021 if we have to, and get stuff done, because we want to be here for them as much as we can. And in the long run, they'll be there for us, because I know our industry is suffering too. We're not exactly raking in the dough, but we're certainly doing a lot better than live events and the like. Did I answer the question?
I think so. I kind of like that, Dean, like helping the businesses that have been supporting out of home to make sure that they're around. Scott and I were just joking earlier this morning about the restaurant that's under our office. When we go back to our office, is that restaurant still going to be there? Like, what is right going to look like when we get back out? And I think it is really important that when we say like we're all in this together, that we're not just thinking of out of home as a channel. Like, we really, as humans, are all in this together. And how can we get out of all of this mess as quickly as possible for everyone to get back to the way things are expected to be? I mean, certainly live events, everybody has pivoted their businesses as much as they can at this point. But I do hope that we, from the traffic that we're seeing, that we're on the upswing, regulations are being lifted. Maybe New York doesn't return to normal as quickly as the rest of the country, which is, it's an unfortunate advertising perspective. I think Dean, Brittany, Scott, Cedric, and I are all in New York, and that's where so many of the advertising headquarters are, that we're seeing a completely skewed version of what is going on in the rest of the country right now that I think is really coloring the landscape for everyone. I know when I talk to clients, like, I don't know if Gina Stratford's on from Yesco, that Salt Lake City looks nothing like New York City right now. It's like so different. Cheryl Zimmerman, I don't know if she's on, who's in Baton Rouge, was just talking about getting a manicure pedicure to Christina Radigan and I almost openly wept. Because good Lord, my nails look terrible. Like it's just a different reality that we're all living in here in New York. And I think it's important that we keep that in mind when we're thinking about out of home in general, that people are emailing me daily and saying, I'm looking at the new impression numbers and they don't show that our impressions are down at all. I don't believe you. Look, it's not the same everywhere else as it is in New York. It is vastly different across the country.
And that's a strong emotional impact that is very visceral, right? Very real, very present right now for anybody in those kind of markets. And, and this is where we have to rely on the data, right? This is where we have to visualize the data and tell that story across the country. And that's why I think it's so important for us to send the message that it's fluid, it's different market by market, it's case by case. It's not one size fits all. And the story's getting better. It's the beginning of the beginning.
Yeah, I think the industry has some myth debunking to do when it comes to like the people making decisions, the CMOs, the people who have these budgets. They think it's a lot worse than it actually is. And I think it's like everyone has to kind of rally together and paint a really positive, realistic story of the out-of-home industry, because it's just like, oh, stay inside, out of home. I think there's like a misconception and it's being oversimplified. And it's just like debunking a myth. it's like the thing. It's like, oh no, that was 3 months ago. Let's get on. Here's what the like today's picture looks like. Things aren't really down. Just more locals, not as much travel. I don't know. I just made that up, but
Well, we're almost out of time. Brittany, do you have like parting words for the out-of-home industry that you could share with us, like on behalf of a brand that loves us dearly?
Words of support.
yeah, I mean, basically what I said, like, if you watch my keynote, you'll see how sort of passionate Vita Coco is about the out-of-home industry. It just works for us. Like, I don't know if we spend like 80% of our media budget on a normal year in out-of-home. And that has increased more and more since we launched press, because the campaign is super conducive to out-of-home. But yeah, I mean, I think things will rebound. It's a ton of good people working, like the network is very tight. And I can't say the same for like digital media and that industry being as close as the out-of-home industry is. So I think everyone collectively putting their heads together and figuring out like, who has the data? How can we like tell the story? It's a close-knit community. So I think now's the time to sort of go after some of these budgets that are going to be up in the air. It's really, I think out-of-home should be more than, what is it, 6% in the average media plan. Because
We love Brittany. Don't we love Brittany? Isn't she great?
like,
let's invite all other types of brands on, and let's just talk about how
and
great
I would
they are.
say like, you should probably go after people who are a little bit like myself, pessimistic about the digital ad industry. And I think that's a trend that's only going to become more pronounced. Like I bought digital ads for the first 5 years of my career, agency side, at Starcom and then smaller ones. And it's hard. I can't really say a lot of things I did during that time worked. Digital ads. It's hard to say that worked, that didn't. Facebook will tell you every ad you run works. Google will do the same. But like if you can feel that something works, like out of home in New York during the summer, by looking at your sales, I think CPG also like makes that work. But it just like you can see the impact of out of home, and I think that's why like get brands that can do that, like CPG maybe focus on that, and it's a lot better than digital, like especially in this environment where there's lots of bad actors, as they call them, which are bots and fraud, like bots. I think that's a funny term, bad actors. But yeah.
Awesome.
And if
Keep
anybody,
going, Brittany. Keep going.
I don't even know what I would say.
Brittany has a great story, because Brittany really, I think, converted Vita Coco to an out-of-home brand. And their office is amazing in New York, and she's just been super open arms and welcoming to the whole industry. Her keynote is outstanding. Scott plugged it on the chat window if anybody hasn't watched it yet. They just have a great brand story and a great brand culture, and so excited that they're supporting our channel the way that they have been.
Let me just correct really one thing, is that our founder is the reason why we love out of home so much.
Ah.
The first ad, Mike Kerbin, he's awesome. The first, and we're privately owned, so the first ad Vita Coco ever bought was, guess what, phone kiosks in Brooklyn, outside of like, because they would go around on rollerblades and sell Vita Coco to bodegas. So like they saw phone kiosks all the time. So I think also, I don't know, like being conscious of who, out of home is very dependent on the people making decisions and what their experience is. I'm sure I don't have to tell you guys that. So maybe sell differently based on where the office or person you're talking to is located. Because I feel like especially for out of home, that's a thing.
Yeah, it's all about being seen, right? You're seeing your own product and seeing your advertisements up.
They're putting a billboard in front of your house right now, Brittany.
Are we out of time? Is it
We
it's
are.
4:01
So
Eastern
Dean,
Standard
why
Time?
don't you wrap us up?
Wrap us up. I think I would like to just thank everybody for being on the event, and anybody who attended as well. And I think we're going to have this up, a recording of it up in the next few days, depending on technological issues of editing and stuff. I think we have to edit out a couple things that I probably said, and then we're going to throw it up on Geopath's site and PMD's site later on. But I just want to thank everybody for showing up and talking. Does anybody else want to mention anything before we leave?
Major
Yeah.
thanks to everyone.
And
Thank you.
Dean. Thank you, Dean, for putting that
Cool. It's
together.
been great. Thank you again.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care,
cheers.
everyone.
Goodbye.
Good.